I don't want no oil a-spoiling my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No nukes!
Good morning, Toledo, and good morning, Bowling Green. Good afternoon, Columbus, and hello to everyone on the internet, wherever and whenever you are. My name is Joe DeMare, and I'm here with my incredible co-host,
Rebecca Wood.
Yes, Rebecca and I are going to create an hour of radio here called For a Green Future. For a Green Future's a wonderful show where we talk about ecology and the environment. And we talk about them in the ways that they affect you, your wealth, your health, your happiness, the wealth and health and happiness of your friends and your family, your pets and your critters that are out there on the farm making milk and eggs and all that stuff we eat, and the birds and the fish and the plankton and pretty much everybody and everything, because, like it or not, we are all wrapped up together on this one little tiny planet in the cosmos called Earth. And we got a great show for you today. We're just going to chat for the next little while here. And by us, I'm really hoping it includes you, because we don't have a guest today. So we're going to be, after we just chat a little, we're going to be talking about ecological heroes, eco-heroes on the planet. People that are, going above and beyond to try to help save this world we're living on. Then we're going to hear from our advertisers and patrons. And then, Rebecca, what will you be talking about this week?
I will be talking about Jewish women and environmentalism in honor of Purim and or Women's History Month.
Okay. And then it's ecological news from around the world. We've got some interesting ecological news. And as I said, I'm really hoping this week we're going to hear from you folks at 877-909-1004. That's 877-909-1004. Oh, no, I'm sorry, not 4, it's 7, 1007. Yeah, just like the station is 100.7.
Yeah, Joe.
Yeah, the call-in number is 877-909-1007.
Not a coincidence.
No. So,
yes.
So specifically, if you want a topic to call in on, since we're talking about ecological heroes, who's your, eco-hero? And it doesn't have to be some big famous celebrity person. It could just be, like your own father or your own mother, anybody that you know that you look up to in terms of them taking care of the earth and, being ecologically conscious. So that's the topic for today. And don't hesitate to call in. Today's the day to call in. We don't have a guest, so we'd love to talk to you personally. So it was kind of cold out this morning as we're getting going, and according to my weather app on my phone, it's about 5 degrees below average right now. But we have to remember, of course, that this is following a month or two of 20 degrees above average. So even though, yes, it's cold right now, global warming is still...
For a second this week, the weather was kind of acting normal.
Yeah, it did cross the average line.
Yeah.
Going from way above average to a little bit below average. It was just like a 8-hour period where it's like, oh, it's normal right now. But it's having a very negative effect on plants and things because, with that month of 20 degrees above, all the flowers started flowering, the trees started budding, like the maple trees started putting out. I noticed the crocuses in my yard, they all popped up, but they were all, in buds still. But just before they opened, now we got hit with this cold snap, and that's been lasting. And so now actually all my crocuses are dying because they,
Suddenly today, there were just a billion birds everywhere on morning walkies.
Yeah, the birds are getting busy, right?
Yeah.
They're staking out their nest areas, and they're getting ready to do that. They're doing all their mating calls, the dances and so forth. And the like the cranes out there, sandhill cranes are doing their big mating thing. That was actually last week they did it. So yes, and the vultures are back. The vultures have returned. So it's coming. Spring is coming, even though we're a little bit below average right now. We are going to get some, warmer weather this week. And don't worry. And then, of course, we're going into the summer with this record global temperatures. And so who knows what's going to happen. So enjoy the cold, I guess is what I'm saying. Because...
I like it when it's bad weather, sort of, because the silver lining is that nobody bothers me and my reactive puppy dog on walkies.
So
we just be peaceful by ourselves.
You get the block to yourself.
Yes.
Yeah. Well,
yes.
That's kind of nice, but
And by bother, I mean exist and be in sight.
Well,
essentially what I mean.
Hopefully, at some point, Tashi's going to realize that not everyone and everything needs to be.
Well, it's taking
challenged.
fewer treaties to coax her into not going completely berserk. So that's good.
That's good. Yeah, progress. Okay, so on to our topic for the next little bit, and that is ecological heroes. And again, 877-909-1007. Who is your favorite ecological hero? And I thought I'd start with the oldest. We're going kind of oldest to youngest here, because one ecological hero that pretty much everybody in the world recognizes is a fellow by the name of David Attenborough. And he is British, and he's 97 years old and still going strong, basically, still out there making videos, making movies and things. He started back in 1954 was his first nature documentary. He had a program on the BBC called Zoo Quest. And then he's gone on to make all kinds of amazing documentaries, including Planet Earth, The Blue Planet. His most recent series was called Life. And he is just this incredibly inspiring guy who actually kind of got into it because he just loved the opportunity for himself to go see all these natural things. That's why he loved doing the nature documentaries, and that's kind of morphed over the years more and more into him advocating to save all these wonderful things he's seen and all these wonderful places he's been.
Because you can't see them if they're not there no more.
Yeah, exactly. And just having the video is not a substitute for having, lions and tigers and, wild animals. It's better to have the actual animals than just pictures of them.
Yep.
So I've got a quote from each of these eco-heroes, and the quote I have from David Attenborough is, "Anyone who believes we can have infinite growth on a finite planet is either mad or an economist."
Yeah.
So he's, that kind of humor is kind of one of his hallmarks.
Although, are those two things actually mutually exclusive?
You're right. He should technically, grammatically, he should have said and or.
Right. Yes.
An economist. Right. And if you're an economist listening, call in. Because, What do you think about this? What David Attenborough just called you out? So let's hear a response from the economists in our audience. Next eco-hero I wanted to talk about is another David, and this fella his name is David Suzuki, and he is a Canadian, and he has a show called The Nature of Things, and The Nature of Things started in 1960, and it's actually still going. It's a CBC program, and he was with it. He was the narrator of The Nature of Things from 1979 to 1923. He hosted that, so that's 44 years. So he put his time in.
Yep.
And The Nature of Things used to be, for a while there, it was very popular on the PBS stations in the United States, but I think he got a little too, what's the word here? A little too edgy for the U.S. PBS stations, because he was starting to get kind of very advocate in terms of saving things and not destroying old growth forests, and there was that edge to his programming. Started to be not just, oh, look at the beautiful trees. It was, let's not cut down the beautiful trees.
Right, yeah.
And that kind of crosses a line, which is one of the reasons that this show initially airs on a commercial station, because if there's this weird rule in American public broadcasting that if you do any kind of call to action, if you present all these facts and then reach a conclusion, that's not allowed. You can't reach any conclusions about anything. So you could say, we've put all this carbon in the air and it's destroying the planet, but you can't then say, so let's stop putting carbon in the air, which is just the weirdest thing in a country that's supposed to have this freedom of speech.
Yeah.
Somehow public broadcasting is severely limited. And that's why I chose to do this show on a commercial station, because as long as you're a commercial thing, you can say whatever you want. Commercial speech is fully protected, whereas public speech. So anyway, this kind of is reflected in the quote I found from David Suzuki. This quote is, "We are in a giant car headed towards a brick wall, and everyone's arguing over where they're going to sit."
Yeah, I've heard that one before.
Yeah. So he's still, like David Attenborough, he is still active, even though last year he retired from narrating The Nature of Things. And one of the things he's just recently done is, we're going to come back to this story in the Eco News segment, is he came out against nuclear power as a solution to global warming. He joined a whole bunch of other organizations and individuals that just recently said, this is crazy. You can't pick the most expensive, slowest, dirtiest form of energy and use that to fight global warming, which is happening right now very quickly. So he's another widely recognized eco-hero. And then, so from here on out, it's all women. So those are the two guys, the two token men, because really the environmental movement is majority, I would say the majority of the active people are women in the environmental movement. I'm saying this as a guy.
I remember I think it was in the late 70s, early 80s, I heard a thing, interview on the radio that it was some lady who is an environmentalist and actually getting a degree in environmental sciences, and she, at that time anyway, calling yourself an environmentalist was considered to be a girl thing. As opposed to a serious biologist.
Yeah. Well, now some people are trying to make it into a dirty word, basically.
Of course. It's
gone, all the way to people just, mocking out environmentalists, and that's a terrible thing. I mean, speaking as an environmentalist.
Yeah, yes.
I mean, and really, truly, environmentalists are some of the most selfless, literally some of the best people I've ever met in my life. Some of these environmentalists, and one of those big environmentalists I'm happy to say I have met is Jane Goodall.
Ooh.
Yeah, I actually met her. She came to a little event in Buffalo, New York, and spoke to a bunch of people at a park, and there were about 20 of us there to hear her, and it was part of a big tour she was doing of the U.S. And yeah, really nice lady, lovely manners.
I read her work when I was an adolescent, and a couple of years ago I got the silverback at the Toledo Zoo to symbolically press his sugar cane against the glass to share it with me.
Oh, by following Jane's.
You get down, squat down low, kind of do that. Look, don't make eye contact. Reach out towards him and make hand gestures. And he gave me some sugar cane. I think he probably thought I was crazy, but he has good manners.
Took pity on you.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, here you go. Well, that's nice.
Yeah.
Gee, and if there had been a little aperture in the enclosure, you might have actually been able to eat some of that sugar cane.
Totally snagged some raw sugar cane.
Yeah.
Yes, sirree bobbers.
Nice.
Yeah.
Well,
that's been shot on by a gorilla.
Well, well, the way we knew that, the way we learned this and the way we knew this is that Jane Goodall, way back in 1960, went to the Gombe Stream National Park, and she's one of the first biologists that actually lived with the animals she was studying. That was considered incredibly radical at the time.
Yeah.
Because, scientists, you're supposed to sit back and have your notebook and, watch from a distance.
Well, she wrote down all they're doing. She did, and it reads like a really good soap opera too. With all the different chimpanzee families and their interrelationships and rivalries. It's really interesting.
Oh yeah, dynasties and
drama and tragedy and the whole deal.
Yeah, and all those things that we think that that's like a human thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, chimpanzees actually also do all those things. From all the really good things like being generous and sharing to being like backstabbing jerks.
That's one thing she says is that I think I read a quote by her at some point that the animal, the primate, the chimpanzee world, in fact, has its Gandhis and its Ted Bundys, just like the human world.
Mm-hmm. Right. So she really opened up the idea that we can look at animals, and some of the stuff that that humans apply to themselves also apply to animals. And since then, of course, we've discovered that animals, all sorts of animals, not just chimpanzees, have things. A lot of the traits we used to assume were just human traits, like loyalty, like generosity, like friendliness, or like aggressiveness. It's not all. When I was growing up, in biology textbooks, it still said that animals were governed by they weren't thinking creatures, they were purely instinctive creatures. That every reaction was an instinctive reaction, and it didn't give animals credit, even the ones that have relatively big brains like us, didn't give them credit for being able to look at a situation and analyze it and make decisions.
Those scientists have never been outwitted by a pug Pomeranian.
Right.
And I'm thinking here of the legendary War of the Snowboats.
Okay.
Mostly.
What's that?
When I tried to get I was complaining about his feet being sore, but then he was extremely creative in getting those snow boots off and losing them.
Oh, right. So
it went on for like a week, and I lost resoundingly.
Well, it's not that, it's not that those scientists weren't ever outsmarted by their pets. It's that they never admitted to being outsmarted by their pets, because you can be sure,
right?
So anyway, Jane Goodall's quote is kind of instructive. It says, "What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of difference you want to make. The greatest danger to our future is apathy. You cannot get through a single day without having an impact on the world around you." So that's a nice, quote. And it's, it's both uplifting because, you get to choose what kind of difference you make, and it's challenging because she points out you're going to make a difference whether you choose to make a good difference or not. Just simply by existing on the planet as a human being, you're going to change things. And so take control, be a little conscious about it, make the better decisions, As we always say here, put the solar panels on your roof, get the geothermal heating, get an electric car, make Jane Goodall proud. So another eco-hero of mine, and she is less remembered now, but back in the mid-70s, everyone knew her name. It was Lois Gibbs, and she was the woman who brought the world's attention to the situation in Love Canal, New York, which is suburb of Niagara Falls, New York, or not a neighborhood in Niagara Falls, New York. And she did all kinds of stuff in terms of breaking barriers and making people realize what was going on. Her neighborhood was terribly contaminated with dioxin, which a lot of people today don't actually know what dioxin is anymore. But dioxin is this incredibly potent cancer-causing chemical that it's a result of combustion and incomplete combustion, and a lot of industrial processes create dioxins. But her neighborhood school was built on donated land, and it was a canal called Love Canal that had been filled for 30 years by a chemical company. They just dumped all their waste into this canal, and then they covered it up with a clay cap and then gave it to the local school board, who went and built a school on it. And the rate of cancer amongst those children, amongst everybody in the neighborhood, was just incredible. And she, in her kitchen, basically organized everybody in the neighborhood when they all realized, oh, you've got cancer too? Oh, your kid has cancer too? And they started adding up the numbers and realized their cancer rate was insane. And that still to this day happens way too often, that some kind of pollution is put into the region and we have to wait until somebody realizes, hey, we're dying at 10 times the national average. What's going on? When, that's something our government should protect us from. Unfortunately, we're still seeing that process happening in places like Piketon, Ohio, where they just reopened the nuclear fuel cycle. And even though the people down there in Piketon are already dying at massive rates from 50 years of nuclear fuel creation, they've started it up again. So, but anyway, I digress a little bit. But her quote is pretty impressive, and that is, average people and the average community can change the world. You can do it just based on common sense, determination, persistence, and patience. And she's living proof of that because of her and her neighborhood group and the attention they brought to the issue. That was what created the Superfund, which is still to this day cleaning up areas. Now, she also founded something called the Center for Health, Environment, and Justice, which is a great organization that gives small grant programs supporting local organizing groups. And so if you're somebody who's like listening to the show and you've got a problem and you're wondering what to do about it, contact Center for Health, Environment, and Justice. That's what they do, is they help local groups organize. And so ever since Love Canal, she's been kind of in the background of hundreds of environmental fights around the country. And very often the people she trains, the groups that she trains, they win their fights. And on their website, they pointed out that the Superfund got $1 billion bonus in 2023 from the Biden administration's Inflation Reduction Act, which is nice, but they also had to point out that that means right now they're cleaning up 85 out of 1,300 identified Superfund sites. So,
Alrighty.
so $1 billion, you know, is nice, but we still got a long way to go. Okay, moving right along here. I want to get to, well, I may have to skip this guy. Well, Helen Caldecott is another person. Oh, Lois Gibbs has been a guest on our show, so you can go back to our podcasts and YouTube videos and watch our interview with Lois Gibbs. Another famous environmentalist that we've interviewed a couple times is Helen Caldecott, and she's from Australia. She's written a whole bunch of books. Her focus has been on nuclear power and nuclear weapons. And so her quote is, nuclear power is not, or one of her books is Nuclear Power is Not the Answer. And then her most famous book is If You Love This Planet. She, in the 1980s, she did extensive speaking tours in the U.S. about nuclear war, and that's part of what led to the limitations of nuclear weapons and a whole bunch of treaties we had with the Russians, some of which we have since dropped out of, which is just insane. But she is the reason there's no nukes in Australia. So
cool.
The whole continent without nuclear power, thanks to her. And her quote is, "It is clear to me that unless we connect directly to the Earth, we will not have the faintest clue why we should save it."
So are the uranium mines still active, though, for other countries?
They're
Okay.
still the third biggest
All right.
uranium supplier in the world. But
that's what Midnight Oil was on about then.
yeah, but there's no nuclear plants there. Okay, our final eco-hero, and we went from pretty old. We went from 97, and now we're going down to 21. And that, of course, is Greta Thunberg. And she has been Times Person of the Year. She was nominated for the Nobel Peace Prize. And 5.5 years ago, she started a Friday protest, which while she was still in high school, every Friday, instead of going to class, she protested global warming. And those Friday protests have never stopped. She's on week 292 now. And this past Friday, her group protested outside a Swedish company called SCA, because SCA is the largest private forest owner in Europe. And what they're doing is cutting down old growth spruce forests and replacing them with monoculture lodgepole pine, which is an invasive species from the North America, and which grows really fast, but it also doesn't provide any food or shelter to native European wildlife. And specifically, it doesn't grow what's called the reindeer lichen, which is a moss and a lichen that's what caribou graze on. And so without any lichen, you can't have any caribou. And it's part of, the Europeans have done quite a bit of what's called bioenergy, which is basically wood chips. They're using wood chips for energy and calling it green. But if you cut down an old growth forest, turn it into wood chips, and then plant lodgepole pine in its place, in no way is that green energy. So her quote, "We all have a choice. We can create transformational action that will safeguard the living conditions for future generations, or we can continue with our business as usual and fail," which is, a point
fail catastrophically, we might add.
Right. And that's a point that we make over and over here on For a Green Future, is that the green future is a better future. It's cleaner. You're going to be sick less often. You're going to, food will taste better because it's, if you're growing organic food versus, chemically processed food. Your car will have better acceleration and be quieter. Everything about the green future is better, but the non-green future is actually going to fail.
How do you know people whose doctors are telling them, no, you don't have any allergies, but you need to take this allergy medication because of all the pollution?
Right. Yeah. And there was actually, I can't remember his name. Maybe somebody else listening can remember. 877-909.
And you had asthma. That's life-threatening.
Yeah. 877-909-1007. There was a very famous talk show host here in the Toledo area, who was a conservative talk show host, and he was told by his doctors he had to move because the air here is too polluted. So he continued his conservative talk show from Vermont,
Okay.
where he continued to argue for things like weaker pollution laws,
Oh, Lord.
even though he physically couldn't live here because it was too polluted. I can't remember that fella's name. I gotta look that up.
Gas mask is a style statement.
And of course, I do also want to mention that in addition to these pretty famous eco-heroes, there's thousands upon thousands of local heroes that are constantly fighting and doing just as much work and protecting all of us. You know, like Vina Coley, we had her on. Pat Morita here in Ohio. There was a woman named Carol Mongerson in Western New York when I was growing up. And, you know, just thousands of people that are always working to try to protect you, because it's a very organized movement to make environmentalists seem like these evil people that want to control you, when that's not what they are at all. But there's thousands of people who are fighting to protect you, because literally every time they win, you win, because your environment's less polluted, you're going to get sick less often. But every time they lose, you lose, because, you know, the opposite is true. Every time they lose, the whole world gets a little dirtier and a little less healthy for living things. So that's it. That was our discussion of eco-heroes. And now it's time to go on to some other heroes. Those are our advertisers and patrons. So let's go ahead and hear from our advertisers.
For a Green Future is also brought to you by the Wood County Park District. The Wood County Park District is a natural resources conservation agency. They protect natural spaces, maintain quality green spaces, provide engaging programming, and they teach people to love and respect nature. They also restore wildlife habitats and lead people on outdoor adventures. Wood County Parks protects natural spaces in Wood County for all to enjoy from 8 a.m. to 30 minutes past sunset every day of the year. There are several ways to get a hold of them and find out what's happening. One is to call them at 419-353-1897. Another is to visit their website, www.wcparks.org. The website again is www.wcparks.org. They are also available on all social media, Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and many others. Just search for WC Parks. That's the Wood County Park District, and we're very grateful for their support.
Yep, we sure are. And coming up soon is the Wood County Park District annual native plant sale. So if you're somebody who likes to garden or have landscaping, definitely check that out. And we'll have the dates for you next week. Okay, also, For Green Future is brought to you by our patrons. And our patrons are wonderful people who have incredible foresight, who have basically the piece of the generosity and the idea of investing in the future in order to invest in our show. Every month a little bit comes out of their accounts, comes over to us, and that's because they went to patreon.com. That's Patreon. They searched for a Green Future. Up popped our Patreon page. They picked a level of membership that matches their budget, and so that's how we can keep the show on the air. Thank you very much to our patrons. Okay, Rebecca, your turn. So what are we talking about?
Okay, well, this week is Jewish Women in Environmentalism.
Okay.
And a lot of that is from an article by that name in the Jewish Women's Archive website, which points out there are some major things in the Jewish value system, traditional value system, that support environmentalism. Like the book of Genesis is the first thing. It commands that Adam and Eve care for the Garden of Eden.
Aha.
And there's also, and I did not know this, this is super interesting. Apparently there's a winter holiday called Tu B'Shevat, which is New Year's for trees.
Okay.
I don't know what people traditionally do, but makes sense to me, you know? That's a big marker when the trees start to come back to life and stuff.
Oh, okay.
So
is that when the trees like get drunk and stuff? And yeah, I don't know.
One assumes what do trees do for fun? It's hard to tell, but yeah. So some women they listed a bunch. I got like 3. Some of the environmentalists who've been inspired by these values would include Helene Allen, sorry if I'm mangling everybody's pronunciation of everything, who is an eco-feminist artist. In the 1980s, she did a project that rescued the Earth symbolically by sending hundreds of pillowcases of soil from military sites to the UN.
Uh-huh.
But I don't know if I would send very many things to the UN that I wanted to save. But maybe that's the point. It's like, hey, dudes, do your job. You know.
Mm-hmm.
And also, she did another project where she floated 2 sacks of seed and earthly substances in the waters of Japan. So they were floating towards Hiroshima and Nagasaki as though to begin the world anew. So, you know, this is conceptual art isn't everybody's thing, but it gets people thinking and talking. So there's that. There's also Judy Belasco, who is the executive vice president of something called Hazon, a Jewish environmentalist group. It does a lot of urban farming projects, apparently, playing off the values of Jewish traditional Judaism would include, I'm going to try and say this, Shmirat Haguf, care for one's body, and Shomrei Adama, guardians of earth. So by growing food for people, fresh vegetables, they're caring for both the earth and for their bodies, which are sacred and need to be maintained and part of the natural system.
Is she the artist that did an acre of wheat in downtown Manhattan?
I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe.
That was a big thing back in the 90s.
Well, Judy Belasco isn't an artist.
Oh, okay.
This is somebody else. But yeah, the first one maybe, yeah. Or also, my third one here is Ellen Bernstein, founder of the Shomrei Adama organization, which is, we're hearing that word again, in 1988, which produces books and materials that explore ecological teachings rooted in Jewish tradition. And I want to end with something I got from reformedjudaism.org. I'm going to have to, this one is hard to read. Let's see. There's another concept, which I think is pronounced Pichnach Nefesh, although, call and correct me, please, which is the concept that saving human lives above all else is our greatest moral obligation. Or I've seen it phrased, saving all the life precludes all else, or comes before all else, something like that. So, yeah, this is people's lives, you know, this is not some silly little thing we're doing because we like owls or something, you know? Mm-hmm. We do like owls, as it happens.
Okay.
But, yeah.
We're
talking about human life, ultimately.
Right, because ultimately, whatever we do to the environment comes back to us.
Yippers.
Much as we like to think we're separated in our little houses and our little cars and things, we're not. We're in the midst of it. All right. Well, that's it. Well, thank you, Rebecca.
Welcome.
And now on to ecological news. And for our first story, we go to Brussels. And there, on March 21st, there was a meeting of world leaders. It organized by the International Atomic Energy Agency. And this was a, what did you call it, Rebecca? Like a supervillain meeting?
Yeah, supervillain conference.
Basically, these ministers from 30 different nations dove into this conference, and it was very secretive, and you know, mainly what they were doing was announcing that they're going to go whole hog into nuclear power. And this is like kind of the exact description of sort of a top-down, centralized, bad decision making, you know, being forced on people and on the world. Because once you make that nuclear waste, it's going to be around for 200,000 years, and the people, like 50,000 years ago from now, people have no control over what these guys are doing. And they were all guys. I noticed that, almost all guys. Yeah. But over 600 organizations joined together in a joint declaration calling on the world's governments not to waste time and energy on nukes. And they have basically there's a hashtag nuclear fairy tale. So if you search for that, you'll find this statement by all these organizations. And Greenpeace actually managed to hold up the whole thing for a while because they they blocked the delegates coming in, and they had for some reason they chose pink as like the theme. They used pink powder, they had pink flares, and they had bicycles painted pink, and they basically blocked the entrance to the conference for a lot of the delegates for several hours.
Yeah.
There's a quote from Greenpeace: "We are in a climate emergency, so time is precious." And they point out one of the main reasons they're fighting this switch to nuclear power is that it's going to, even the nuclear industry itself, in its most optimistic projections, are saying it's going to take at least a decade to get these plants online. And, historically, whatever the industry projects, you at least double it. Sometimes you quadruple it.
Being that they are a wildly optimistic bunch of folk, to use a euphemism.
Yeah. And so Greenpeace and these 600 other organizations, including David Suzuki, by the way, are all saying, don't go this way. This is a waste of time and money. It's a massive distraction, and you're jerks for considering it. Okay, that's not a quote, but
Well,
it's sort of the sense of it.
It might have been implied, sort of.
All right. So we contrast that. Now we go to our next story. We go from Brussels to Bilbao, Spain, Bilbao. And there they had the World European Annual Event of Wind Energy. It's the annual Wind Europe annual event. And it was sort of night and day, whereas the nuke conference in Brussels was this secretive thing with just like these corrupt government officials. The Wind Europe annual event, 12,000 people came to that. And there were over 400 speakers, including 14 ministers of different countries. And the mood there was extremely optimistic because investments are up in wind power. Auction volumes for wind energy, where basically the countries put out auction bids and let companies bid for supplying wind power, and those are setting records right now. There were over 520 exhibitors at this annual event, this wind energy annual event. And in 2023, wind supplied 19% of the EU's energy. That number is increasing every year. Now, nukes in Europe supplied about 25%, so it's a little more than wind. But the thing is, nuclear energy is dropping because plants are actually dropping out faster than they're being replaced because they're ancient and they're leaky and they're dangerous. And some countries like Spain have decided to drop nukes altogether. And so the goal expressed at this conference is that by 2030, which is now just 6 years away, they want to increase the percentage from 19% wind to 35% wind. And they also pointed out that the wind industry alone in Europe right now employs 300,000 workers. And the projection by 2030 is that's going to go up to 510,000 workers. And so 26 governments signed the wind power pledge there, that they're going to increase their wind energy. So not bad. There were 30 nations saying they're going to go nuclear, and 26 that saying they're going to increase their wind instead. And in the countries that have made the decision to drop nukes and go with wind and solar, the transition is happening much more quickly. The transition away from carbon is happening much more quickly. Now that might seem counterintuitive, because nukes are supposedly a low carbon energy source, but basically what it is an allocation of resources. The more you allocate into the technology that doesn't work or works super slow and is super expensive, the less you're going to be putting into the technology that's quick and clean and cheap, the wind and the solar. And so Spain is one of the countries that's decided to drop the nukes and go 100% renewables. And right now, already, wind supplies 27% of Spain's electricity. And Spain's looking to close, it's been closing nuclear plants. It's looking to close its last couple nuclear plants in the next few years. And so just kind of night and day, you know, I just wanted to put those two back to back to show the difference between an energy source which is absolutely dependent on government support, government subsidies, government, you know, decisions made behind closed doors with, you know, ministers getting lobbied by industry people, versus wind energy, which takes a lot more people to put in, so it employs a lot more people, and it's open. You know, there's nothing secretive about wind power. I mean, and just, you know, 12,000 people versus like 50 or so ministers, it kind of shows you the difference between wind and nuclear. Okay, now a whole different topic and a different continent. We're going to South Korea, and you'll appreciate this one, Rebecca.
I will?
Yes.
Okay.
This actually happened back in January. We missed it at the time, but on January 9th, the South Korean parliament passed a law. They are banning dog meat.
All right.
Yes, they're no longer going to eat dog in South Korea. Now, there is a big, huge dog meat industry there. There's like 1,100 dog farms in South Korea, and people eat about 500,000 dogs a year. So there's a 3-year grace period for them to get phased out, and there's also money in order to compensate these farms so they can switch into other sorts of farming. So if you're somebody who likes to eat dogs in restaurants, you got 3 years to go visit South Korea before they shut all their dog meat restaurants down. This law targets the farmers and the sellers. So if people raise the dogs and butcher them, they can get up to 3 years in prison or $23,000 fine per dog. But it's still legal to eat dog. So, you know, it's an interesting way to go about it. You don't target the end user, but you do target the industry that's creating it.
Right.
Attitudes towards eating dogs have been changing pretty steadily through the years. It used to be considered just like a cultural thing, you know, hey, this is something we do. So now 65% of South Koreans favored the ban, and more than 90% of South Koreans have stopped eating dog meat. So it's pretty much just the old folks that acquired a taste for it over the years. So, and people are mostly using dogs as pets now in South Korea. So there's some argument over the ecological footprint. I've seen some debate. You know, a lot of animal rights people are saying, well, you don't eat dogs, but pigs are just as bad. So now how could you not eat the dogs and still keep eating the cows and the pigs and the lambs and animals like that? There is an ecological difference depending on what you feed the dogs, because dogs are carnivores. So if you're feeding the dogs meat, you know, then you're raising meat for the purpose of feeding to dogs that you're then going to eat, which ecologically speaking, that's just insane. It just takes so much energy. And, you know, but if you feed the dogs pretty much vegetable food, you know, vegetable, like corn, for example, the Mesoamericans, actually the Incas and the Mayas raised dogs for meat, and they pretty much just fed them corn. And so in that case, it's comparable.
And they're adapted to live on a higher, more grains, more
right.
starch, and a little bit of meat.
Yeah. So it's all a question of what you feed. You know, it's like you are what you eat, but you know what you eat also, it's what they are too. So so that's good news from South Korea. And you know, we make the argument here that we could do an amazing amount of environmental benefit by just reducing the amount of meat we eat. I mean, there's a lot of Americans that eat meat at every single meal, and that is essentially, that's kind of unsustainable, and it's also not good for you. I mean, if you eat meat every meal, you're your arteries get clogged quicker. You know, there's all kinds of. So we're not saying become a vegetarian or a vegan, although, you know, we support people who do that, but America needs to cut back a bit. You know, we don't need meat every single meal, even though it tastes good and so forth. Okay, now bringing it back to home here, an article in phys.org, phys.org, March 22nd, title, In Lake Erie, Climate Change Scrambles Zooplankton Seasonal Presence. And there was a study of 4 different kinds of zooplankton. This study ran from 1995 to 2022. And they looked at when the different zooplankton have their population booms, and their peaks and valleys and their population numbers. And they found that those numbers, those dates are being wildly mixed up by the warming of the water and by invasive species and by the availability of the food for the plankton. And the zooplankton are the plankton that eat the algae. So one of the reasons we may be having these algal blooms is because the plankton that are supposed to eat the algae are getting disrupted. And they found that the population peaks now can vary by as much as 3 weeks, and that puts things like 3 weeks earlier. And this has ripple effects up the food chain, because a lot of fish, and then like the birds that eat the fish, they have to time their population cycles to match the zooplankton cycles, because you want to, you know, create your eggs when there's a lot of food, because it takes a lot of nutrition to make eggs. And so if we come to, you know, reproduction time, that time of the month or that time of the year, and there's not a lot of food, then you're not going to reproduce as much. It's going to reduce. So the shift in zooplankton populations is going to lead to a reduction in fish populations. And then the reduction in fish populations would lead to a reduction in bird populations, and so on up the line. So this study went from 95 to 22. And of course, as we've reported, this past winter was the first winter ever where the Great Lakes didn't freeze, you know, where the maximum ice cover at one point got up all the way up to 10%, but that was it. And then for the rest of the winter, no ice at all. And we know now from recent studies that the plankton that grow on the underside of the lake ice are just as vital and just as important to the ecosystems as the plankton that grow when there's no ice.
Wow.
And so another factor in this whole assault on the zooplankton is an invasive species that's come over from Europe, and that is a critter called B. longimanus, which the common name is the spiny water flea. And the spiny water flea, as you might guess, is this critter. It's just a little bit above the zooplankton. You can barely see one. They're like a 1/16 of an inch long, so if you have one on your fingertip, you can see it, but it's almost invisible. But they have, as the name suggests, a huge spine. It's like twice the length of their body. And so they can't be eaten by smaller fish or larval fish. And so they actually compete with other fish because they eat the zooplankton. And so a lot of fish are actually starting to decline in numbers because these spiny water fleas are taking over. They first showed up in the Great Lakes in 1984, and they probably came over in the ballast water of a tanker from Europe. The eggs, interestingly, can survive being eaten by other fish, and they can survive being dried out completely. And some places, some lakes, the spiny water fleas, what they do is if you're fishing, they'll actually get on your fishing line, and they can get on and so thick that they'll actually clog your fishing line. You won't be able to reel in your fishing line because it's got thousands and thousands of these spiny water fleas sticking to it.
Wow.
So the Great Lakes are in trouble here from these all these changes, and you know, pretty much we're responsible for all of them.
Yep.
You know, all those things that they listed as affecting the population, maturity times and numbers. And specifically, spiny water flea competes with perch. So you don't think of a little critter that's like 1/16 of an inch long competing with an actual fish. But the more spiny water fleas there are, the fewer perch there are. And of course, the fewer perch, then the fewer game fish that eat the perch.
It's perch season right
Yeah.
now, too. I saw it in the Tony Paco's sign.
Yeah.
Tony Paco says perch.
I like perch.
Yeah.
You know, it's tasty. But it's just a reminder that this global economic system we got going, which is great in terms of bringing us products and things, but when that kind of shipping, when that kind of transcontinental stuff happens and you bring in an invasive species, that can cause more economic damage than, you know, whatever was in that tanker in 1984 that dumped the spiny water fleas in here. Whatever they shipped was not worth the damage those spiny water fleas are doing to the country
Probably
right now.
not.
So that should be like one of our most important things that we prevent all the time, is these invasive species from getting started. Anyway, so that's it. That's our show. As always, you can email us at joe@joedemar4agreenfuture.org. You can send us a text message, 419-973-5841. Thank you so much for listening. We will be back next week, Easter Sunday. And this is Joe DeMare.
And Rebecca Wood.
And we are signing off.
I don't want no oil, a spoil in my shoreline. I like fish much better than crud. I like birds and things a-creeping and crawling. Won't trade no more oil for blood. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that black demon oil's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. I don't want them nukes run by them kooks who think radioactivity is fun. No more three-headed frogs or kids with leukemia. Nuclear power ain't fit for a dog. The sun done give us all we need to make this country run. But that nuclear power's got us fussing and fighting, and I do believe it's time we was done. No